what he got to say. He love you each and every way. In a fever style, I would say. Never know how much I love you. I never know how much I care. When you put your arms around me, I get fever that's so hard.
Rush a little on the street as people continue to run. Many of the cars.
A great ball of fire, smoke started billowing out.
There was a voice in the Secretary Rumsfeld,
a huge explosion. We can see a cascade of sparks.
The 9/11 attack on America looked so much like a formula action-packed Hollywood disaster movie that it had "Made in the USA" written all over it. The only difference is it used real props and real people. It had terrorist villains, American firefighter heroes, fireball explosions, collapsing buildings, pedestrians chased by dust clouds, and it even had a God Bless America music score. Well-positioned cameras shot the action-packed drama from every conceivable angle.
Just the picture of the helicopter landing and the president walking in, and then the
19 hijackers had been Saudi nationals. So in the terrible...
He said that he didn't believe that Osama bin Laden...
No one has blamed or accused him formally.
knew that how many people worked in the building.
The city is confirming that some 265 firefighters are believed.
None of us will ever forget this day.
People who knock these buildings down will hear all of it soon.
America Remembers, Sunday, 8th.
The timing, the title, and the eerie advertisement for Harvey Weinstein's Lord of the Rings movie called The Two Towers was a prophetic and disturbing coincidence. Profits from the Two Towers movie were small change compared to the 911 reality disaster movie, which has become the world's top-grossing production of all time. The only thing missing are the 911 producer, writer, and director credits. But it doesn't take an Enron accountant to figure out who's cashing in. During the first week, the 911 producers made a spectacular fortune just on the stock market alone. How? By knowing in advance that the stocks in airline and insurance companies associated with the 911 crash would fall in value. Using that inside information, they made negative bets on the stock market called put options. Put options are bets that a certain stock will fall in value by a certain date. It's big risk gambling, unless you've got inside information that can turn your bet into a sure thing. But that's illegal if you get caught at it. Put option bets on the decline in 911-related airline and insurance stocks skyrocketed by a whopping 600% just before 911, which means that somebody knew about the attacks before they happened. Who exactly were those somebodies? Merrill Lynch and HSBC, Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, the Bank of America, weapons manufacturer Raytheon, the Lehman Brothers, General Motors, Swiss Re, Munich Re, and AXA Re Insurance Company, which owns 25% of American Airlines. These insiders bought put options through Deutsche Bank.
Most demanding clients trust Deutsche Bank to perform. Deutsche Bank, a passion.
Buzzy Krongard, the former executive director of the CIA, just happened to be the manager of Deutsche Bank. And so the profiteers from 911 were not Osama bin Laden or his band of U.S.-trained Arabs. They were blue-chip Israeli, U.S., and British businessmen. Within the first week, the 911 producers sucked up $40 billion in box office profits from U.S. taxpayers who were hypnotized, terrorized, and traumatized by the infinite reruns.
Think of it as a conspiracy theory true or false test. A. When George W. Bush started his first oil company, who helped fund it? Osama bin Laden's brother and brother-in-law. True or false? B. After a terrorist bomb at a barracks in Saudi Arabia killed 19 Americans, who got the multi-million-dollar contract to rebuild? The bin Ladens. True or false? C. On the morning of September 11, 2001, who was in a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington? George Bush Sr. and Osama bin Laden's brother. True or false? Actually, the answer could be D, all of the above. Because believe it or not, as far-fetched as they sound, each and every one of those things, the bin Laden link to the Bush Oil Company, the bin Laden construction contract after the terrorist bomb, and the bin Laden-Bush meeting on 9/11, is true.
Many of the facts surrounding the events of 9/11 point to a cover-up, like the fact that the Bush administration ignored all of the advance warnings of the 9/11 attacks. Warnings from FBI agents like Colleen Rowley and from the famous Phoenix memo were not only ignored, they were suppressed. FBI Deputy Director John P. O'Neill quit his job when his investigation of Osama bin Laden was blocked. According to a September 24th Newsweek article, top Pentagon officials canceled their travel plans for 9/11 because of security concerns. While the American public were sitting ducks, all of America's political, military, and corporate VIPs were kept out of harm's way. 2 Muslims accused of the 9/11 hijackings took their flight training at Rudy Decker's Huffman Aviation School in Florida. Rudy Decker's is linked to the CIA and drug smuggling through Carib Air and Britannia Aviation, which shared the same small Venice airport with Decker's. The media reported that on the night before the attacks, accused ringleader Mohammed Atta and 2 other Muslim hijackers got drunk, fondled naked dancers in a Florida strip club called Shuckums, forgot their business card and their Quran holy book at the bar, publicly bashed America, and loudly boasted about impending bloodshed the next day. Would devoted and highly secretive Muslim hijackers risk their planned mission by attracting so much negative attention? And why were they in Florida instead of Boston the night before their suicide flights? On the early morning of September 11th, 19 Muslim men well known to intelligence and security agencies supposedly waltzed past airport security checks, boarded 4 passenger planes, and turned them into deadly missiles without even a hitch. By 8:13 a.m., flight controllers temporarily lost radar contact with American Airlines Flight 11 and reported a suspected hijacking. Even though Andrews Air Force Base is only 10 minutes from Washington, emergency response fighter jets took close to an hour instead of the typical 15 minutes to scramble and begin searching for the hijacked planes. By then, it was too late. President Bush already knew about the first Flight 11, which occurred at 8:46 a.m., when he sat down to chat with school kids at Booker Elementary School. It wasn't until 9:05 a.m. that he was notified that a second plane, Flight 175, had also crashed into the World Trade Center and that America was under attack. Instead of being whisked to safety in this national emergency, Bush nodded and continued chatting with the kids for another 20 minutes about a pet goat, while American citizens were burning alive and leaping to their death from the smoking towers.
Wailing against the wind as they fell, almost as if they had second thoughts. I was absolutely horrifying.
And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to wonder exactly what President George W. Bush knew about the attack, and when he knew it. According to the official White House version, it was at this moment in a Florida classroom that Bush learned the second plane had hit the World Trade Center and that the U.S. was under attack. But here's what George Bush himself said almost 3 months later when asked about September 11th.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And I said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think about it.
Now, wait a minute. George Bush was told about the second plane while he was inside the classroom. So you just heard him describe seeing the first plane crash on television that day. But that's impossible. No one saw the first plane crash on TV on September the 11th because the videotape of it didn't surface until the next day.
At 9:55 a.m., President George W. Bush took off in Air Force One with no escort or protection from fighter jets and circled around for the next hour. Why was the president's plane airborne and unescorted for an entire hour while hijacked planes were roaming the skies? The inexperienced hijacker pilots who took only a simulated flying course reportedly flew the third hijacked plane, Flight 77, into a Top Gun 270-degree turn, bypassed the offices of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and crashed into an insignificant part of the Pentagon that was under renovation. Emergency response Air Force fighter jets were finally airborne when a fourth hijacked plane, Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania at 10:06 a.m. The media reported that passengers overpowered the hijackers, but nearby residents saw U.S. fighter jets overhead and gave eyewitness reports of debris falling from the sky. That debris was found 8 miles away, indicating that the plane had been shot down. Within hours of the 911 hijackings, a massive Blame the Muslims campaign was launched by CNN and the media and continues to this day. In less than 48 hours, the names and mugshots of 19 accused Muslims were flashed across TV screens. If government investigators knew nothing, how did they identify 19 Muslim men as the hijackers so fast from fake passports and with no DNA evidence? How could Muhammad Atta's passport survive the fireball explosion that supposedly cremated him, fly out of his pocket, fly out of the incinerated plane, flutter to the ground into 2 feet of debris, and end up in readable condition in the hands of investigators, all within 48 hours? Why did 19 Muslim men even need passports on domestic flights? How were passports found but not the plane's voice recorders? Why did the hijackers need passports they would never use again after their suicide flights? And why were the 19 accused Muslims not under surveillance on 911 if they were so easy to identify? The suitcase of accused ringleader Muhammad Atta was never loaded onto the hijacked plane and conveniently fell right into the hands of investigators. It was jam-packed with incriminating evidence, including a Quran, a how to fly a commercial airplane video, and a fuel consumption indicator. Why would a hijacker about to die on a suicide mission pack a suitcase? It seems Muhammad Atta was a very forgetful ringleader who carried around a lot of Quran holy books. He reportedly forgot one Quran in a Florida strip club, another in a rental car, and still another one in his lost suitcase at the airport. More incriminating evidence of flight manuals written in Arabic were found within hours of the attacks in parked rental cars at the airports. Why didn't the terrorists take a taxi to the airport? Can they be that smart and that stupid at the same time? The conspicuous trail of planted evidence continued 3 weeks after the 911 attacks, when anthrax letters killed 5 people and were clearly worded to throw the blame on Muslims. Death to America, death to Israel, Allah is great. It has since been proven that the anthrax came from a U.S. Army lab and was never mailed by Muslims. Were the 19 Muslims accused of the hijacking set up as patsies and framed? If so, who set them up? Right after the attacks, CNN deceptively and repeatedly showed an airport security video of Muhammad Atta. CNN neglected to tell viewers that the video showed Mohammed Atta boarding a plane at Portland, Maine, not the hijacked plane. There are no airport security videos of any of the 19 accused Muslims boarding any of the hijacked planes. Right after the 9/11 attacks, CNN reported that the US government had a tape recording of Osama bin Laden telling his mother that something big was about to happen and that she wouldn't be seeing him for a while. CNN later acknowledged that the report was false. Osama bin Laden consistently denied being involved in 9/11 and claimed the Israeli Zionists were behind the attacks. According to Japanese, Chinese, and Indian news reports, Osama bin Laden was killed in Afghanistan in the fall of 2001 and was buried in an unmarked grave by his own men.
Following the money trail, Osama bin Laden. Army sources telling me, even via Iraq, via other places overseas, we know where he is. We're on him. It's just a matter of time. Do you agree with that?
I believe he's dead.
Really?
I'm 98% positive that we killed him in December of 2001 during the Tor War campaign. I've seen no proof of life since then, regardless of these tapes that are cobbled together.
On Halloween 2004, just before the U.S. presidential election, this man, dressed in an Osama bin Laden costume, confessed to the 9/11 attacks, scared American voters, and tricked them into treating George Bush to another 4 years in the White House. Zionist extremists believe that Hebrew Jews are God's chosen race of people with a God-given right to the land of Israel. The Muslim world and millions of Europeans, including Germany's former Minister of Technology Andreas von Bülow, believe that Zionist extremists staged the 9/11 attacks on America to ignite the war on terrorism. That war has targeted Israel's Muslim enemies and is being fought and paid for with the blood, the lives, and the tax dollars of terrorized American citizens. Half the world believes that 9/11 was a conspiracy carried out by Islamic Muslim extremists with financing from Muslim charities. The other half believes it was a conspiracy carried out by Jewish Zionists with financing from Jewish charities. Is there any evidence to support that belief? Since 9/11, FBI Director Mueller, BBC News, and ABC have confirmed that 7 of the 19 Muslims whose mugshots were flashed around the world did not die in the 9/11 crashes. They are alive and well and are victims of identity theft. An 8th accused Muslim died 1 year before the 9/11 hijackings even occurred. Who stole their identities, and why isn't the FBI looking for them? If the hijackers really were Muslims, why would they steal the identities of fellow Muslims and implicate them? Wouldn't they be more likely to steal Israeli identities and put the blame on Israelis? If the hijackers were Israelis, wouldn't they be likely to steal the identities of Muslims and put the blame on Muslims? Even though no one has been officially charged or convicted of the 9/11 hijackings, CNN and the 5 Western media monopolies have exclusively sold the American people on a Muslim conspiracy. Unfortunately, the only eyewitnesses capable of positively identifying the hijackers died on board the hijacked planes. Before flight attendant Amy Sweeney was killed on hijacked Flight 11, she picked up an airphone and reported that 4 Middle Eastern-looking men had hijacked the plane. The fact is that Israeli men are Middle Eastern men who just happen to be Middle Eastern-looking. The voice of the hijacker heard from the hijacked plane's voice recorder reveals that the accent of the hijacker matches an Israeli Hebrew accent.
Stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're heading to the airport.
The next transmission comes seconds later.
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll danger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
After 9/11, 1,000 Middle Eastern-looking Muslim men were swept into U.S. custody, but the media kept quiet about 60 Middle Eastern-looking Israeli men who were also taken into custody and held under great secrecy. On December 11th, Carl Cameron of Fox News ran the first of a 4-part series about a group of Israelis who were among the 9/11 suspects. These detained Israelis failed polygraph tests about their surveillance activities against the U.S. and were caught videotaping the 9/11 attacks from different angles. Fox News also reported that the evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 was classified, but a leaked 61-page report from the U.S. government's Drug Enforcement Agency revealed that another 120 Israelis posing as artists were also rounded up right after 9/11. Carrying counterfeit visas and green cards, the Israelis admitted that they served in the Israeli army in explosives, electronic, and military intelligence units. Did Middle Eastern-looking Israelis who were detained as suspects after 9/11 steal the identities of the accused Muslims? The leaked DEA report revealed that Israelis with Israeli military backgrounds had posed as artists and lived on Sheridan Street in Hollywood, Florida, just down the street from Mohammed Atta and 3 other accused Muslims. On August 18th, 1 month before the 9/11 attacks, a New York Times article by reporter Sheila K. Dewan described a group of 4 foreign artists who smuggled their way into the World Trade Center just months before 9/11. The artists occupied studio space free of charge on the 91st floor with 14 other artists and claimed to be writing a book called The Bee Thing. They also claimed that they constructed a temporary balcony on the 91st floor as a prank. Somehow, these so-called artist pranksters escaped the attention of the World Trade Center's heavy security companies. George W. Bush's brother, Marvin Bush, just happened to be the director of Securicom, which provided electronic security for the World Trade Center. By some mysterious coincidence, Marvin Bush's company also provided electronic security for 911's United Airlines and 911's Dulles Airport. So what were 18 foreign artists really doing living free of charge in one of the world's most expensive rental spaces? Many top engineering and demolition experts believe that the Twin Towers were rigged with explosives which caused the buildings to implode vertically in a typical controlled demolition. The reason the collapsing buildings looked like a controlled demolition, say experts, is because they were a controlled demolition. Photos and video recordings confirm that explosions occurred at the base of the 2 towers as well as in Building 7 before they fell. On September 24th, firefighter Louis Caccioli told People Weekly point blank, "We think there were bombs set in the building." That claim was echoed by many witnesses and by firefighters who heard the explosions just before Tower 1, Tower 2, and Building 7 collapsed. The steel-supported Twin Towers were built to withstand the impact of a passenger jetliner, yet the official explanation for their collapse is that the burning jet fuel heated the steel support beams and caused them to buckle. Expert independent investigators insist that it's impossible for jet fuel burning in oxygen to melt steel, and that most of the jet fuel burned up outside the buildings in clearly visible fireballs. After the crashes, the white smoke turned black, indicating cooling temperatures, not rising temperatures as reported. Why did a company called Controlled Demolition quickly haul away, melt down, and dispose of 499,850 pieces of structural steel that could have proved the temperature the steel had reached and the use of explosives? Why did Tower 2 that was hit last fall first, 53 minutes after being struck, whereas Tower 1 fell 1 hour and 28 minutes after being struck? An even bigger mystery is why Building 7, owned by Larry Silverstein, collapsed much later on in the afternoon, even though it had never even been hit. If these 3 World Trade Center buildings were rigged with explosives, when could the explosives have been installed, and who controlled access to the buildings? The 30-year-old World Trade Center has always been publicly owned and managed by the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. That is, until a Jewish businessman named Louis Eisenberg became the chairman. Eisenberg is an active leader in Jewish Zionist organizations. He personally oversaw negotiations that put the publicly owned World Trade Center into private hands. Those private hands belonged to 2 Jewish pro-Zionist billionaires named Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowy, even though their bid was lower than other bids. Lowy served as a commando in the Israeli army, and Silverstein just happens to be the former chairman of the United Jewish Israel Appeal. With Eisenberg's help, they landed the 99-year lease worth $8 billion for half price at $3.5 billion. During the moving, renovations, and security changeovers, explosives could have easily been installed in the buildings without detection. George W.'s brother, Marvin Bush, was not only the director of the World Trade Center's electronic security company, he was also the director of the World Trade Center's casualty insurance company called Houston Casualty. That company terminated their insurance coverage for the World Trade Center before 9/11, right in the nick of time. Another suspicious company occupied the 16th and 17th floors of the North Tower. That company, called Zim Israeli American Shipping, suddenly broke their lease, paid a $50,000 penalty, and moved out of the World Trade Center only weeks before 9/11. Zim Israeli American Shipping is owned by Zim Israel Navigation, which just happens to be owned by the government of Israel. If the new owners, Silverstein and Lowy, knew about the 9/11 attacks in advance, why did they buy a 99-year lease to the doomed buildings? Because they could do the simple math. Silverstein bought the $3.5 billion World Trade Center with only a $15 million down payment, which amounts to 0.01% of the total. He took out maximum terrorist insurance coverage only 6 weeks before the attacks. The demolition of the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11 eliminated Silverstein's cost for an $800 million facelift to update the aging 30-year-old buildings. As soon as the spanking new World Trade Center is finally built and expanded to over 11 million square feet of rental space, Silverstein stands to pocket billions of dollars per month. In the meantime, U.S. taxpayers are covering Silverstein's so-called losses. Then there's the big payouts from insurance policies with mega-terrorism insurance, which Silverstein took out just weeks before 9/11. Silverstein is demanding a 200% payout by claiming payouts for 2 separate 9/11 attacks instead of 1. Silverstein's insurance companies, called Swiss Re and Munich Re, are the same companies under investigation for advanced knowledge of 9/11 and for profiting from 9/11 on the stock market. If Silverstein's insurance companies knew in advance about the attacks, why would they insure doomed buildings? Were these giant insurance companies handpicked to keep a lid on their insurance investigation findings and to ignore the evidence of 9/11 cover-ups? Silverstein has since bought out Frank Lowy, paid off investors and loan groups, put limits on victim compensation claims, and turned the publicly owned World Trade Center into the smelliest private real estate deal in American history. George W. Bush threw up permanent roadblocks to stop an independent investigation of the 9/11 events. When the 9/11 Senate Committee report was published, 27 pages that would have connected international banks to 9/11 were censored. On October 30th, 2003, a CBC television documentary investigated the 10-year friendship between the Bush family, the bin Laden family of Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi royal family. That friendship includes illegal presidential campaign contributions and partnerships in oil and weapons companies like the Carlyle Group. Since 9/11, 2,500 relatives of victims filed trillion-dollar lawsuits against 7 international banks, against the Saudi friends of the Bush family, and against the U.S. government for suppression of information. On 9/11, all U.S. flights were canceled, and desperate relatives of 9/11 victims were grounded.
48 hours later, September 13th, an update. Private flights were still prohibited. To take off required government approval at the highest level. That morning, Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia visited the White House. And later that day, something unusual began to happen. Despite the blanket aviation ban, several private planes, from Learjets to a 747, were cleared to depart from various U.S. cities. On board were dozens of the Saudi elite, almost every one a bin Laden or a Saudi royal. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Alderman was desperate to find a way from Paris to New York, where her son Peter was missing.
The bin Laden family, whoever was in the United States, got safe passage home, and I couldn't get home to be with my children. Other families couldn't get to New York, who lived far away, to even begin to look for their children. At this point, we didn't know who was alive or who was dead. I couldn't get home, and the bin Laden family were all able to get home.
Since 15 of the 19 hijackers were accused of being Muslims from Saudi Arabia, why wasn't the fury of George W. Bush directed at Saudi Arabia instead of opium-rich Afghanistan and oil-rich Iraq? Before the first plane ever even hit the first tower on 9/11, a massive military buildup was organized near Afghanistan called Operation Swift Sword and Operation Bright Star. 23,000 British troops were sent to the Oman Gulf near Afghanistan, and 17,000 U.S. troops joined NATO troops in nearby Egypt. All of these forces were positioned for attacks on the Muslim countries of Afghanistan and Iraq before 9/11. The Patriot Act, which was designed to limit American citizens' democratic rights and freedoms, was also designed and written months before the first plane ever even hit the first tower. So who exactly are the producers of the 9/11 reality disaster movie that collected billions from insider stock market trades, $200 billion and counting from terrorized U.S. taxpayers, and gazillions of dollars from the conquest of Iraq's oil fields and Afghanistan's opium fields? Contrary to popular opinion, the producers of 9/11 are not practicing Jews. And contrary to popular opinion, the producers of 9/11 are not practicing Muslims. They are a secret network of international pirates who identify with no nation, no national flag, and no established religion. Their flag is the skull and crossbones, and their god, G-O-D, spells gold, oil, and drugs. It is important to understand the difference between the term Jews, Hebrews, and Zionists. The majority of the world's Jewish population are honest, caring, honorable people who practice Judaism, follow religious tradition, and embrace good moral values. The term Hebrew refers to the Hebrew language. It also refers to the Hebrew people who are the ethnic descendants of the original 12 tribes of Israel. The term Zionist refers to political extremists. Zionists believe that the Hebrews are God's chosen race of people and that the Hebrews have a right to the land of the Muslim Palestinians. Why? Because according to the Bible, God said so. These Zionist extremists represent only a small minority of Jews and Hebrews. Christians who support Israel's theft of Palestinian land are called Christian Zionist extremists. Their goal is to help fulfill the prophecies of the Bible story.
Countless millions of Americans are reading a series of novels called Left Behind. They're topping bestseller lists all over the country, and they're being made into movies. They chronicle apocalyptic times. The setting is the 21st century, complete with warplanes and TV correspondence.
This is Buck Williams reporting live from Israel. I am standing in the middle of an all-out attack.
But the plot is ripped from the pages of the Bible, so it all winds up here in Israel, where according to the book of Revelations, the final battle in the history of the future will be fought on this ancient battleground in northern Israel called Armageddon. It will follow 7 years of tribulation during which the earth will be shaken by such disasters that previous human history will seem like a day in the country.
I made the only decision I ever knew how to make. I did what I thought was right.
50 years ago, the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Japan. To this day, Americans know very little about how that decision was reached.
The idea that the United States committed these and other horrific crimes against humanity and participated in the 9/11 incineration of thousands of its own citizens is too frightening a thought for many to consider. But even more frightening are the consequences of denial.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Thomas. I'm the author of 710 Peasants Publishing, and tonight we're going to be doing another installment of The Pillars of Columbia, Out of the Oceans and Not Out of the Shadows. Let's go ahead and turn this all the way down. Thank you, everybody, for joining in tonight. Hopefully you've been able to keep up with the previous installments of The Pillars of Columbia. One of the ongoing resources that we're going to be using is a poster that I made, or a composite that I made, that's going to help people understand some of the MK Ultra mind control that's being floated through the media, either by politicians or by celebrities or by people within the medical mafia. And so we're going to be looking at some of the themes that I already covered in previous videos, try to get everybody kind of at the beginning of where we're going to start here tonight. So just a little bit of remedial. One thing that you're going to want to make sure you understand is that one pillar corresponds to mercy, the other pillar corresponds to comfort. And so you've got an east and a west, and you've got a left and a right, and that creates a gateway. That's going to create two pillars. That creates an arch, and then underneath the arch is where the seance or magic occurs. So let's go ahead and get started. We've got a couple of slides. Hopefully this isn't going to be too disorienting. I'm not all the way organized with this, so hopefully the slides will be in a decent enough order. One thing that is very useful is understanding that the powers that be decided to put together these ships that were going to correspond to mercy and comfort. Mercy and comfort have to do with the east and the west and the coast of the continent. And so inside of the continent is where the magic or the seance is happening. And the seance is called the, RONA, or the takeover of the emergency powers in America. You may or may not know that the situation has been gifted over to BlackRock and FEMA. So really there is not a executive branch and a legislative branch anymore. It's now been given over to emergency powers and emergency administration. So everything you see on TV now is a little bit behind the reality, and everything now is all about kind of like flashing these forms of MK Ultra wetware in front of people so that they're associated with the colors, the symbols, the terms that they're already familiar with inside their subconscious. And we call it wetware because it's strictly for your subconscious. So everybody in the United States is a Palestinian or an Egyptian or a Babylonian or an Israelite. And they're being taken through a series of dramas, and between the pillar of comfort, which is in New York, and the pillar of mercy, which is on the West Coast, the magic happens in between that. And so you'll see in this composite that there's white planes going into the train. The train is going into the ship. And so both these ships were taken down by RONA. They were sacrificed, and they were brought away from where they were when they contracted the virus. So both these ships were kind of used in a very subversive way, put it that way. It's propaganda, it's programming, it's not for your conscious mind, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. The guy who tried to drive the train into the ship, that doesn't make a lot of sense to the conscious mind. So let's go through these here if we can. We started off tonight with the video on the 9/11 problems, the conflicts that have been going on with the 9/11 narrative, and I streamed another video who was featuring a ex-Jesuit priest who was going through the duty of the Society of Jesus. And so we're going to try to thread some of these things together tonight so that people can understand how the loss of rights is taking place in parallel with the fighting of a virus, in parallel with the installation of 5G, in parallel with the changing of the financial treasury system, in parallel with the giving over of the education system to FEMA. And so there's all these things happening concurrently. And with all of that, we have a deluge of information. And with that deluge of information, we have people becoming victim of the MK Ultra wetware. And that is unfortunate, of course, but you have something going down called Operation Lockstep. And this is where the Rockefeller medical mafia and everybody that was involved with the NIH and WHO and the UN, we have a tremendous amount of disinformation going out, and it's disorienting people. And that disorientation is leading to people grasping on to what's called bias confirmation. And so instead of using critical thinking and verifying sources, you have people out there just grasping at something that confirms their suspicions. So you got QAnon, you got vaccination people that support the vaccinations, you got contact tracers, you got cops that are busting people, you have the politician enablers, and then you have the Bill Gates fanboys. And they're all, got their face right in the ball sack of this Operation Lockstep. They're enabling the whole thing because they're not seeing the loss of rights. They're really not helping the preservation of rights, you could say. They're not helping the system because they're distracted. And so we're going to get into the next layer of this West Coast, East Coast situation. Recently, a cop came out and started talking about constitutional rights. He is a Seattle cop, and he speaks for the Coast of Mercy. And he's a broken arrow, and he thought that his command had his back. And once he shot his video, he found out that his command does not have his back at all. And he got a knife in his back from somebody who's, got a cloaked dagger. So they said, good job, and then they called him back and said, that's just going to have to come down. And when he said no, then they took action against him. So you got this guy who, was the first of everybody. He's trying to offer everybody some mercy around what's going on. And so they made an example of him. And so what happened next was that a cop got on his phone and decided to make a video. Now he represents New York, which is comfort. This is going to keep on going with the little theme that they put out with the ships. This New York is the comfort. And he's telling everybody that they're still standing. They're out there doing their work. They're standing by their oaths of the Constitution. So the rights of the people are their number one priority. And that they're still out there and they're still observing their duty. And so he's giving everybody this sense of comfort that, I agree with this guy over here, and it's wrong if he gets canned, and everybody else out there needs to listen to his words and heed his words. So he's the still standing sanctimonious guy. And what sanctimonious means is he's fervently talking about the fact that the original guy was right. And so he's speaking to the virtue of right. He's virtue signaling and saying that that guy's right. And the oath is the number one thing that cops need to be, observant of, not all of this other, stuff about, getting sick and everything else and busting people when they're out, doing what they should be doing with their lives and earning a living. And so we come down here to Florida, and they've got circling up on 2,000 deaths. They've got this fancy website that has to do with the phases in which they're bringing everybody out of the lockdown. And so they have this fancy website that talks about all of these things, and part of the things is public confidence. And so the safe, smart, step-by-step plan to reopen the state must be rooted in sound medical judgment and driven by health metrics. And so you got to realize that this has to do with FEMA. They're literally telling you that this has to do with FEMA. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Constitution. And so the cops are, running this flack, saying that, we're out here wondering if this is all going bad, while, the states themselves have these fancy websites showing you exactly what they're maintaining as their lead-in for opening up the society and opening up the economy. And they're already calling it economic recovery. They're already talking about all this stuff as though it's past tense. So, let's go back over here. We got on the West Coast, we got Mercy. And the ship was in the port of LA. In LA, they've got a guy named Garcetti. And Garcetti is saying that opening up the city of Los Angeles gives the spiritual nourishment that they need, and it gives us the material prosperity that many people miss, and give them hope that the economy and the health can both recover in the days ahead. So you have nourishment, you have prosperity, you have hope, and then from that, recovery. And what they're looking to do between both California and LA and in Florida is to implement these and scale the contact tracing programs throughout the state using these phased approach, targeting the geographic regions to contain new outbreaks, leverage private sector and university partners to scale up contact tracing throughout the state. So that's something to pay attention to right there, is that they're going to be leveraging these private sector things and the university partners. Same guy, this is still Garcetti, he's saying these are big steps, but they also come with big responsibility. I'm confident in you that we can make these changes and meet head on not just the threats of this virus, but the hope of this moment with these new permissions. And so the idea is that this is all new. This is the new normal. You're going to be giving them new permissions to be a part of your life. And that's kind of where they're making, they're making a situation out of this that are there people that are ushering this in? Yes. Are cops helping usher this in? Of course they are. But you also got these cops out here who are, acting as though they're a broken arrow. And so you got mercy and comfort. So that's the new layer of the seance that's going on. These guys are using words, in both of these videos. When you go in here, these guys are using vernacular that what you would say harkens back to things. There was a phrase that this guy used called awaken the giant and awaken the sleeping giant. And over here, this guy was saying that there's a problem in that people are basically not paying attention, and the cops are having to be put in between a rock and a hard place where they just can't be they can't enforce these policies, and it puts them at danger. So they're either going to stick up for themselves or they're going to be put in a more and more precarious position. Now, one thing that everybody needs to get very, very comfortable with is the fact that there is a consortium of men who are working very, very, diligently towards something that not a lot of people want. Bill Gates is a part of it. Dr. Fauci is a part of it. You got this guy named the Black Pope, Arturo Sosa, Superior General of the Jesuits. And Dr. Fauci is a full-on Jesuit-educated PhD, and Bill Gates himself has been long involved with various Jesuit organizations. And so his eugenics program is something that he worked with several universities with. He's given grants to them, and so there's this continuity between these ex-glacial society organizations and these non-governmental organizations. And Dr. Fauci himself came out of a Jesuit high school, went on to the College of the Holy Cross, and then on to New York City's Cornell Medical School. Let's see, residency at New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center. His successes fueled his professional ascent into the chief of the Laboratory of Immunoregulation in 1980, and then director of the NIAID under President Ronald Reagan in 1984 for the HIV and AIDS research. So he's brought in by Reagan. That's his start into government service in 1980. With the HIV then primarily known for its devastation within the gay community, the new director faced the dual task of persuading the administration to take the crisis seriously and convincing activists that he was not at fault for the perceived government inaction. So, he's brought in, then he's immediately put to work on this AIDS thing. And a lot of people that have done their homework on AIDS, they know that Bill Gates has been kind of a centerpiece to the whole AIDS and Africa situation. Likely very central to the AIDS in America situation, too, if you dig deep enough. Now, if you know about the Cornell Medical School, they're one of the first American medical schools to be established outside of the United States. They have a wing of their research school university in Qatar in the Middle East. So they're looking to expand their joint influence and international influence across the globe. And Regis High School, private Jesuit secondary school for Roman Catholic boys, located in Manhattan. College of the Holy Cross, better known as the Holy Cross, is a private Jesuit liberal arts college in Massachusetts. It is the oldest Catholic college in England, in New England, and the oldest in the United States. And going on there, the few of the medical schools that he was involved with are underlings of the Columbia University structure complex. And you know that Columbia is in New York as well, of course. It's a private Ivy League situation. They have a private research university. It was established in 1754 on the grounds of the Trinity Church in Manhattan. It's the oldest institution of higher education in New York. So, very important to understand how the power structure works to send these Jesuit individuals into the center of our focus. And so you'll see on this composite that I have both at the top here Ronald Reagan and then Tom Hanks. And I want you to remember these guys because Ronald Reagan brought in Fauci, and Tom Hanks is being used by Fauci for his blood for the antibodies, for the cure. So something to realize about Ronald Reagan is he played a guy named the Gipper in this football movie, and the Gipper is stricken ill and he's not able to play on, and so he tells the coach to win one for the Gipper. And the Gipper is stricken with a fatal illness, and this is in 1920. He's on his deathbed. he encourages a guy named ROCKNE to win one for the Gipper. Well, what's interesting about ROCKNE is he was buried at the Lakeview Cemetery in Michigan, whereas Bill Gates was enrolled in Lakeside Prep School. And the GIP, the guy that Ronald Reagan plays in this thing, the real guy actually dies of pneumonia, and he actually is, in his life, Notre Dame's first All-American. He's honored by Walter Camp. And oddly enough, this Knute Rockne gentleman was exhumed, and they took a part of his right femur for DNA purposes. And there was a big scandal because he supposedly wasn't exhumed correctly, and there, was some kind of a question as to what was actually going on. And so the connection here is that Ronald Reagan is playing the star football player from yesteryear Notre Dame lore, who was one of the four horsemen. And you guys know about the connection of the four horsemen. And Knute Rockne was tragically killed in a plane crash in 1931 on a trip to California. So there's like this whole continuity of strangeness between actors and the Catholic Roman situation. And so you've got Tom Hanks, bringing his situation into our situation with this thing. So you got Knute Rockne here, who is he's died in a plane crash on transcontinental flight, Western airliner in Kansas on March 31st of 1931, while en route to participate in the production of a film called The Spirit of Notre Dame. The plane crashed into a wheat field near BAZAAR, Kansas, killing Rockne and 7 others. Rockne's unexpected death startled the nation and triggered a national outpouring of grief comparable to the deaths of presidents. President Herbert Hoover called Rockne's death a national loss. King Haakon VII of Norway, Rockne's birthplace, posthumously knighted Rockne and sent a personal envoy to Rockne's massive funeral. More than 100,000 people lined the route of his funeral procession, and the funeral was broadcast live on network radio across the United States and Europe, as well as parts of South America and Asia. So this guy was knighted. He was given this huge posthumous procession. And so we're supposed to, remember him from the past because Ronald Reagan brought him back to life. Ronald Reagan brought Fauci to life. Fauci's bringing Tom Hanks to life. And so you have this, connection of procession. And it's up to us to realize that there is kind of a seriousness to this. There's a facet of illusion to this. There's a facet of oppression to this. There's a facet of ritual to this. There's a facet of human sacrifice to this. But when we say wetware, it means it's being planted into your subconscious, and it hasn't happened yet. And so it's foreshadowing. Whenever they talk about this stuff, it's foreshadowing. And that's kind of where you have the opportunity to rewire it for yourself and for the collective by being aware of it and being aware of the fact that there is nothing it can do to you because it is past tense. And let's bring this up here. Del Rey, Kings. So the whole Port of Del Rey in Los Angeles, that's Kingsport. That's where the Comfort is taking place. Let's see if we can find the correct thing here. So let's go to the bottom of this slide here. It says, show us one who does not serve either king or feudal lord, but in a lofty spirit prefers to follow his or her own bent. Such people are exceedingly rare, and are naturally enough, they appear often as children of misfortune. Nevertheless, they have chosen aright, and in due season gain their reward. So that's just a little hint here. We're going to cover the rest of this here in a second. I'd like to go over a little slide here of text, if I might. There we go. So let's go ahead and read this off. The Federal Reserve was set up by the Rothschilds, and the Rothschild family is the official title, guardians of the Vatican Treasury. It even says this in the Encyclopedia Judaica. The dynasty founder, male Amschel Rothschild, was already a member of the Vatican Knights of Malta, and so he has a degree of power, but they are still serving of the 1500-year-old Vatican system. The CIA was founded by Vatican Knight of Malta, Bill Donovan. He is a Knight of Malta and is even saying so on Wikipedia. Several other CIA directors like McCone, Bush, and Alan Dulles were also members of the Knights of Malta. Only one CIA director was a Jew. The Bilderberg Group was founded by two Vatican Knights of Malta, Prince Bernard of Holland and Joseph Rediger. Members of the French nobility and proud Roman Catholic Henry de Castries, who also has many Vatican Knights in his family, headed up the steering group of Bilderberg in the last years. Henry Kissinger is also a Vatican Knight and is also an advisor to the papacy since Pope Ratzinger appointed him. And the heads of the EU have all been Jesuit-educated Roman Catholics, as is ECB President Mario Draghi, and the current EU head is Polish Roman Catholic Donald Tusk. The head of the UN, Gutierrez, is also a devout Roman Catholic, and the majority of the USA Supreme Court is also Roman Catholic, and yes, 3 Jews as well. Head of the climate change affair of the EU is Roman Catholic from Holland, Frans Timmermans, and the modern New Age movement was started by Jesuit Teilhard de Chardin, which we should evolve into a higher consciousness nonsense. He was the one who started that stuff. Is the New Age movement. For example, the ex-Jesuit Alberto Rivera became a born-again Christian and began spilling the beans on Rome. And so there are many Kabbalist Jews in the NWO system, but they don't rule the world, and but what you should know is that the Antichrist papacy does. And this is what was predicted in the Bible, of course. And so you've got Freemason politicians, you got the Jesuits and the Knights of Malta all kissing the ring, but they don't kiss the ring of the rabbi after the election, but they bow down to the Antichrist papacy. And all of the European nobility are also Vatican Knights as well, along with the Queen Elizabeth, who is a Dame of Malta. And so if you're looking for more information on this, you would read Revelation 17 and recognize that the mother of harlots, dressed in scarlet and purple, is drunken with the blood of the saints, blasphemy on her forehead, calling herself God, ruling over the kings of earth. And so you've got this opportunity here to understand that there's this global complex that is working to take your what you would say inheritance. You got this thing called the crown energy coming to you, and they empty it out and they get you going with the whole scared, fear, low vibratory self-worth you're going to take from yourself for the sacrifice of others. And so you get into this indolence and you get into this debauched type of situation, because even here in America, it's like everybody's suffering, but they've got all of the resources that they need. You're in your house with 800 rolls of toilet paper, but you can't make your car payment. And so there's this debauched kind of aspect to this whole thing, and people are getting into a misdirected sense of responsibility, which leads to same situation of virtue signaling. This is part of this debauchery where from the outside shell it looks real nice, but when you get into the actual principles and the values of it, it's profane and prostituted. And so these individuals are losing direct touch with the Kether, the highest, which is diverged never so little from the delicate balance of the middle pillar, and at once the holiest mysteries of nature become obscene and shameful secrets of guilty conscience. And so you're at home feeling guilty for the fact that you can't go to work. You're feeling guilty because you're needing to stay home for other people. And it's not a healthy relationship to anybody, because you're being guilted into taking from yourself and essentially doing without for yourself to try to preserve someone else's honor. And so that when this all happens, you get into this empty, indolent type of behavior where the idea of sacrificing for someone else is shinier than the value of sticking up for your own rights. And that's kind of where we're at in America right now, where people need to stick up for their own rights instead of virtue signaling. The throne of the spirit is the crown, and that is the I guess what you would call the transition that people make when they begin realizing that they are born with a inherited set of rights, and with those rights come with the responsibility to weld their power with humility. Well, humility contains loyalty, and loyalty contains courage, willingness, and commitment. And so you have to have those things towards yourself first. You have to love yourself first before you can ever love someone else. And so when you're talking about responsibilities, you have to be responsible for your own rights first. You have to be loyal to your own rights first, so that you can express humility outwards, which is to preserve other people's rights as well. Now, what we're having to deal with in our society is this sense of dishonesty, the sense of intellectual laziness, the sense of injustice. If you're sitting at home and you feel like you're non-essential, then stay at home. You do not need to feel as though there's, you could be made to do anything that you don't want to. If you don't want to be out in the public sector, you don't want to be at your job, nobody can make you do that. In that same breath, you do not have the right to virtue towards someone else, saying that they should or should not do something. That's an intellectually dishonest position. And so the idea that you can take from yourself for the benefit of another is rooted in debauched thinking. It's not justified. It's injustice. And so we're trying to move from these low cunning behaviors and move upwards, make the adjustment, get out of indolence, start moving towards art, towards moving towards humility. But the only way to do that is to use our power to overcome worry. And power comes with loyalty towards yourself, loyalty towards your higher virtues within yourself, loyalty towards other people. So you have courage, willingness, and commitment towards your individual rights. Then you can start sticking up for the individual rights of other people. And so you've got the opportunity to create peace by not telling other people what they should and shouldn't do. You have the opportunity to be lofty in spirit by following your own bent. These are exceedingly rare people that are willing to do this. But if you look in this visual right here, if I could go in here to the, see this feather on this hat? You're weighed against that feather. Your soul is weighed against that feather. So the decisions you're making throughout this whole RONA experience has to do with, you know, all that you're taking with you. And so we're moving up the pyramid here through humility, learning how to be artful with each other, learn how to use love and cohesion with each other. And so there's this opportunity to hang yourself. You see the hangman up here? And there's an opportunity to integrate ourselves and be the Princess of Cups. But we have to use humility to be able to get there. We have to use loyalty to get through to the creating of art through humility. Everybody deserves their inheritance, which is the Kether, the throne of the spirit. But we can't do that if we're going to be using debauched behavior and pointing fingers at each other and virtue signaling towards each other. The beating of pots and pans, the showing that you're wearing a mask online, the whole thing where you're showing the number of the scale in which you're taking the seriousness and the germophobia. Let's do a little more reading here if we can. I did a couple of posts earlier about the MK Ultra wetware that was affecting people around white hat, black hat, and that we've got a live exercise going, and the live exercise alluded to Venezuela. Venezuela, of course, happened, and now we're sitting inside of a live exercise. Well, another live exercise is happening, so we kind of have a fractal situation occurring. So there's a little more critical awareness that we can have within all of us. I'm going to take a little sip of water here real fast if I can. So we got a quote here from somebody who posted it to Facebook. It says, "New concept for some. Your rights come with inherent responsibility. Rights do not stand alone, you dumbasses. Kinda like freedom isn't free." So I wrote here some commentary on that quote because this is very important for America to step over the MK Ultra PATSY wetware that is being disseminated by politicians in the media and the movies and the celebrities. So let's sit around a campfire and speak to rights and responsibilities due to the MK Ultra pandemic of shaming other people for honoring their personal rights. The shaming is called a savior complex. Rights come with the responsibility to preserve them. Rights come with the responsibility of the Hippocratic Oath that you will seek to do no harm in your decisions making, and you will seek to do no harm in your decisions making, and you look to observe your cause to effect within your decisions. You have the right and responsibilities because you know that they're even interwoven. You have a right to express yourself freely, yet you have a tacit responsibility to do no harm to a person, place, thing, or reputation. You have the right to congregate freely. You have a responsibility to treat others like you would like to be treated in kind. You have the right to defend yourself, your family, your property, and your means to do so, yet hold the responsibility to maintain strict standards to the fitness and the operational value of your arms, being cogent of the fitness of those around you in the storage and maintaining of defense weapons. You have the right to a means of life without coercion of association, garnishments, or pledging, yet hold a responsibility to respect the earth, the neighbor, the complex relationship of everything that exists. What you do not have the right to do is moralize the existence of someone else, codify their workday, or label them as essential or non-essential. You do not have the right to project shame towards someone for making a choice for themselves that differs to yours. And this is seen within the context of kosher and veganism and others. Whatever you choose for yourself is your truth based on your life's experience and your personal view of reality. When someone says that their right to freedom comes with a responsibility to neglect themselves, this is a drug war POW dispensing their savior complex self-affirmation. Communism shames people into gentrifying their behavior, to comply, to adapt, to narrow down. The entity that is spurring on the POWs is the same entity that they curse due to, and pick whatever you want to curse the government for. But then they love the entity when they perceive it to be a protector or savior or beneficent handler of their most sacred things, which is our private life. We have to stick up for individual rights, or we will see forever that our apathy is what leads to coercion, and more coercion leads to more apathy. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of status delusion. The situation is dire, and there is an ideological barrier between shaming and expressing our rights. The flash of clarity that is needed to get out of the savior complex is so small, but look at how much is fueling the narrative of shame on me, shame on you. Maybe a quote will help drive this whole point in all of these status delusions and moralist projection home. His disciples said to him, "Who are you that you should say these things to us?" Christ Lion said back to his disciples, "You do not realize who I am from what I say to you, but you have become like the Jews, for they either love the tree and hate its fruit, or love the fruit and hate the tree." And you guys all know Christ Lion as the guy who got nailed to the cross for talking shit about communism in his day. And so there's this continuity here of people acting as though you need to follow the ordained script. And that's not going to help out our situation for making sure that we have rights. People talk about a mafia, people talk about a cabal, people talk about a secret conspiracy of men acting together. Well, that's essentially what priori de Sion is. That's what the Holy See is. There likely is going to be a realization that the whole thing is put together so absurd. And let's just cover a part of the absurdity real quick here, because I'm not someone who's quick to jump on, you know, little details that don't have a lot of relevance. I like meaningful details. Well, one of the more meaningful details that I came to see here is that the CARES Act was submitted on January 24th. This is very, very, very early in the timeline for the RONA in the United States. The president wasn't even taking this seriously until mid-late February, early March. So there's a bill that was introduced by a Democrat, Joe Courtney, representative in the House. This is the CARES Act. And that's been passed into law since then. And it was passed into law, let's see, on 3/27. So about 3 weeks ago. Now, the country was brought under FEMA on 3/13. 9/11 and 3/13 are inextricably linked. What does the 3/13 announcement do? Well, it frees up $50 billion in resources, but what it does is it rearranges the government. The FEMA is now in the position to be a coordinator. The setting up of the emergency operation centers, the conference of broad new authorities, all of this stuff has already happened. And so you can say that FEMA is activated, the workers are activated, the health crisis situations that have been rolled out in Agenda 21 are all activated. And so you've got these governors working in lockstep with the FEMA emergency plan. And so they're using the conflict to take away people's actual capacities to act on their own self-determined means. And that's not going to be good. It's not going to work out real well for us. For me personally, I enjoy my liberties. I enjoy my endowments. I enjoy my inheritance, and that I would like to keep them. Let's see if we can go back here to the original. This would be worthwhile. I used this image to put together this particular presentation because there was supposed to be a lot of fear instilled into people with the use of these coffins. These coffins are a big show of loss of life, and the new ROCKNE thing is a huge loss of life, and so there's this continuity of the loss of life, genocide. And that's scary to people. It really does scare people. I've also got some I don't know if I got them in here. Thought I had some files here that had to do with the Black Rock aspect of this. If we can just find it real fast here, I'll be really happy. Got lots of stuff on the iconography. Well, I'm not finding it at the moment here. This kind of sucks. the part that is most important to realize in this, let me actually bring this up appropriately. Everything was changed with the Treasury. Everything was changed with the there's two sides of this, right? I guess there's BlackRock and then there's the FEMA. Three branches of government are not working because of the emergency declaration, and then you have the Treasury not working because of the relabeling and retitling under BlackRock. And so you have people very, very confused as to why our stock market is still going strong and there's checks being doled out. Well, the Constitution is no longer relevant. There's no longer understanding of what's lawful nor de jure. And so we're going to have to, you know, help people more or less with understanding how the natural law goes against, you know, the legal law, the man's law, and there's a jurisdiction that's going to have to be rebutted. They're going to say that they got jurisdiction over review with these contract tracers, and you're going to have to rebut that presumption. And so we're kind of in a thing where people are virtue signaling to each other instead of preserving rights. They're talking about how they're using masks and they're staying home and they're foregoing their employment, collecting the checks, and this is going to fight the war on RONA. Well, the reality is we're not in a war. This is all being foisted on people so that they guilt themselves into a narrow form of existence, and that's what communism is. And so the beginning of this video had to do with 9/11. Well, this is the same government that foisted 9/11, and that's where we're all having to come to grips with the fact that, you know, you can't love the fruit and hate the tree, right? You know, and the next day hate the tree and love the fruit. It does not work that way. They're talking about the government. They're talking about the services that the government gives out. This is not a government anymore. And that's why it's very important for people to realize that when you're working between private capacity and public capacity, you preserve your rights. And that's kind of where we're all having to realize that there's something that's going to give now, and they're going to come knocking on your door asking if you want to have services, and they want you to answer to the name. And so the name that you give them is not yours. It's not anything that you actually have possession over. And so when you give that over to them, you're creating a connection that it karmically has to do with you. It binds you. And so with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this version of Pillars of Columbia. I really appreciate you guys following along this long. The installments will keep coming because the craziness and the wetware keeps coming. So I appreciate everybody, and we'll catch you along next time. God bless.